The room was full of flowers. Too many, actually. Their scent clung to the air like something overcompensating. Rows of guests sat stiffly in polished pews, whispering behind fake smiles. The candles flickered in their golden holders, swaying slightly, even though there was no breeze. And the bride? Well, the bride hadn't walked in yet. They were already 5 minutes past schedule. The organist was repeating the intro, and the priest, he kept checking the back entrance, looking pale, looking guilty. But then, the doors opened. She didn't glide in. She stormed, alone, no bouquet, no veil, no father by her side, just a slow, terrifying walk toward the altar, wrapped in a dress the color of dried blood. Her hair was pulled back, her eyes looked swollen, and something about the way she was breathing made everyone hold theirs. The groom stood frozen at the altar, face drained of color, hands twitching like he wanted to hide them. The priest took half a step backward. Then the whispers started, one by one. Guests leaned toward each other. Is that... Wait, is she wearing... Where's her dad? What happened? She didn't stop walking until she stood right in front of both of them. Then she turned slowly and faced the congregation. Her voice was calm, measured, but every syllable hit like glass breaking. You know how people say the devil hides in the details? She looked at the priest, then at her fiancé, then down at the black phone in her hand. I found him, and he was hiding in the church bathroom. With this man, just 30 minutes before we were supposed to say, Amen. No one moved. The groom opened his mouth. Nothing came out. The priest blinked once, twice, didn't speak, and then she raised the phone, pressed play, and the church was filled with a sound no one ever expected to hear inside holy walls. Heavy breathing, a whisper, then the unmistakable voice of the priest, saying something that would echo in people's ears long after they left the church. The maid of honor screamed. One of the bridesmaids fainted. A child cried. But the bride, she just stood there, red dress, black eyes, and one sentence that ended everything. This isn't a wedding anymore. This is a burial, and I came dressed for the occasion. There's a moment in every story where time doesn't move forward. It folds back on itself, like a loop, a warning, a second chance that most people ignore. If your chest just tightened a little, if your hands are still or your screen is suddenly too quiet, then maybe this isn't just entertainment. Maybe it's recognition. Maybe it's memory. Before we go further, stop scrolling. Because of this story, it doesn't unfold for just anyone, only for the ones meant to hear it. Tap the like button, hit subscribe. We track the ones who stay. We also remember the ones who don't. And while you're here, drop your location in the comments. We want to know where the watchers are watching from. Now, let me take you back. Not to the wedding, but to the months before the betrayal, before the veil was lifted, before the dress was red. Her name was Elena, 27, event planner. She didn't have many friends, but the ones she had would describe her as steadfast, not dramatic, not loud, just someone who gave more than she had, consistently. A woman who remembered birthdays, brought soup when you were sick. I volunteered at soup kitchens without posting about it. She met him at a charity fundraiser in Los Angeles. He was quiet, a little awkward, said he used to work in tech but had found something deeper. She liked that he didn't talk too much, that he listened more than he spoke, that he said God changed him. Elena believed in God, not just on Sundays, the kind of belief that meant she still said grace in restaurants, still wore her grandmother's rosary on days she felt uncertain. So when Daniel, that was his name, told her he was returning to the faith, she didn't question it. She welcomed him. She encouraged it. He started attending her church, their church, and the priest there, Father Abraham. He'd baptized her as a child, taught her catechism. He was practically family. That's what made everything so hard to see clearly. The closeness between Daniel and Father Abraham didn't seem unusual. The priest said he was spiritually mentoring him. Sometimes they'd disappear into the rectory for hours. She assumed it was a confession or spiritual guidance. She even felt proud that her fiancé was embracing his faith so seriously. But then, the little things started, not enough to shout over, but just enough to notice. His phone, always face down, the way he wouldn't let her near his laptop, the long walks with the priest, after dark, around the church grounds. Once, she'd come by to surprise him. He hadn't mentioned he'd be at the church that night. But when she entered, only candlelight guided the nave. No mass, no choir, just murmured voices from behind the sacristy door. She didn't go in. She told herself it was nothing, that she was imagining things, that it wasn't her place to interrupt. She left quietly that night, drove home crying, without a reason she could name, and by the next morning, she'd convinced herself that she was the problem, that her mind was making shadows where there was only light. So she buried the feeling, like most people do, when they're afraid the truth will destroy everything good. The wedding planning went on. Colors were chosen, menus decided. Elena refused to let her thoughts ruin it. She told herself, "This is the devil trying to distract me from my joy." But the devil doesn't always distract. Sometimes he hides, in silence, in secret, in sacraments. And 3 days before the wedding, Daniel insisted they go for confession. Together. Elena found it strange. He'd never requested that before. But she went. He went in first. She waited outside the booth. He took longer than usual. When it was her turn, Father Abraham's voice sounded rehearsed. He barely looked up. She left that day with a headache she couldn't shake, one that felt like a storm circling, just out of view. The night before the wedding, Elena stayed at her sister's house. They laughed, they drank tea, they prayed. But inside she wasn't at peace. And in the early hours of the morning, she dreamed of standing at the altar, wearing red. And everyone turned their backs on her. She woke up crying, but said nothing. It was just nerves, she thought, until it wasn't. Daniel said the priest changed his life, that he owed him everything. At first, Elena thought that was beautiful. To find a spiritual mentor who could reshape a man's broken history, that felt sacred, holy, healing. But it didn't stay beautiful. Over time, Daniel became less like a groom preparing for marriage and more like a man bound to something he couldn't explain. He stopped laughing during dinner. He avoided mirrors. He woke up once with scratches on his arms and said he'd fallen during a walk with Father Abraham. But when Elena asked where they went, he only said, "Near the forest, behind the church." She didn't even know there was a forest behind the church. One evening, she called him repeatedly. No answer. He texted back 3 hours later saying he was in reflection with Father A. 3 hours, on a Thursday night, in a church that was already closed. The next morning she noticed something strange, a long robe, white, stained, crumpled in the back of his car. Not a priest's robe, not Daniel's, but something that smelled of incense and soil. She asked. He told her it was for a play, that Father Abraham was helping him with a religious performance. But when she brought it up to the priest himself, weeks later, he blinked, then smiled, and said nothing, not even a word to confirm or deny. It was like they shared a secret language, a rhythm that excluded her completely, and in that silence, the kind that says too much, she knew something was wrong. On the last Sunday before the wedding, Elena sat alone during Mass. Daniel had insisted he sit in the confessional that day to reflect. Father Abraham led the service, but his words didn't feel like they were for the congregation. He kept looking past the crowd. His eyes landed on her, once, twice, and then again. His sermon was on temptation, but he didn't mention lust, or money, or ego. He said, "The most dangerous temptation is the desire to see what God has hidden." And as he said it, his voice dropped. His fingers clenched the lectern. and a chill moved through the room, like the windows had opened all at once. But they hadn't. Elena left early. She didn't take communion. She didn't say goodbye. She went home, sat in the bathtub for almost an hour. Water is cold, phone off, and she asked herself a question she'd never dared speak aloud before. Who is he really marrying? That question didn't go away, not that day, not the next, and certainly not on the morning of the wedding. The morning of the wedding started too quietly. There was no excitement in the air, only a stillness that didn't feel earned. Even the birds outside her sister's window weren't singing. The sky was overcast, gray like faded parchment. And when she looked at herself in the mirror, the woman in the reflection blinked a second too late. Elena tried to ignore it. She put on her silk robe. Her makeup was applied by a woman who kept calling her lucky. Her sister hummed as she zipped up the dress bag. Photographers arrived. Champagne flutes clinked. Everything looked beautiful. But underneath, her hands wouldn't stop shaking. At exactly 10:27 a.m., the bridal convoy left the house. Her phone buzzed once. Daniel's name. Just a single line. "Already here. Can't wait to see you." She didn't reply. 15 minutes later, she arrived at the church. A small historical chapel tucked away in the old quarter. Stone walls, worn pews, the same altar where her parents had married. The bridesmaids stepped out first. Her father waited by the entrance. The photographer motioned for her to stay seated, said he needed a quick portrait before she stepped out. She nodded. But then she noticed something. Her veil. It was missing. It wasn't on her lap, not in her bag. She remembered placing it inside the church dressing room the night before, tucked beside the robe she'd borrowed from her late mother's wedding trunk. Without telling anyone, she slipped out of the car, entered through the side hall, passed through the vestry. Her heels echoed faintly as she walked alone, the church's morning silence now heavy, like it was holding its breath. She opened the door to the bride's dressing room, and there it was. Her veil folded neatly on the chair, but just as she reached for it, she heard something, muffled sounds, rhythmic. Low voices from the bathroom connected to the room. A gasp, then a moan, then silence. She didn't move. For a moment, her body refused. Her hand slowly reached for the knob of the bathroom door. She didn't think so. She just turned it. And what she saw made her lungs collapse in on themselves. There they were, the groom and the priest, not kneeling in prayer, not confessing, kneeling together, entangled, both of them half undressed. The priest's collar was on the sink. Daniel's tie was wrapped around the doorknob. One of them whispered something she didn't understand, in a voice so unfamiliar it barely sounded human. They didn't hear the door open, but when they saw her, the world stopped. Daniel flinched. The priest froze. No one spoke, not even her. She didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't drop the veil. She looked at them both, dead in the eyes, and she walked out. Slowly, as if memorizing every detail. She left the room without slamming the door, without a single question, and she never looked back. No one saw her return to the bridal car. No one asked why she stayed inside for another 20 minutes. No one noticed the silence inside her was now louder than the organ music outside. What she did next was not out of rage. It was precision. She told the makeup artist to leave, asked her sister to bring her the emergency dress she packed just in case, a dress her mother once wore the night she found her own husband in betrayal. Red, long, sleeveless, with a neckline sharp enough to wound. She wiped off the bridal makeup, applied nothing but eyeliner and a single smear of dark lipstick. Then she looked at herself in the mirror, smiled, but her eyes didn't. The thing about red is that it doesn't ask permission. It doesn't whisper. It doesn't fade into the background. It announces, it invades, it dares you to look away, and punishes you if you do. Elena knew that, and that's exactly why she chose it. The dress slid over her body like armor, Not silk, not satin, but memory. Pain that clung like fabric. Strength shaped into something sleeveless, floor-length, and entirely hers. As she zipped it up, something inside her sealed shut. Not her heart, not her hope, just the door to pretending. Outside, the organ began to play. Guests rose, the groomsmen aligned. Father Abraham adjusted his robe. Daniel smiled for the camera. They thought she would come in white. They were wrong. The church doors opened, and everything stopped. Gasps, hands covered mouths, phones lowered, eyes widened. Because there she stood, Elena, no veil, no bouquet, no smile, just her, in a deep crimson dress, with her hands by her side, and her head held higher than it had ever been. She didn't walk. She marched, each step echoing louder than the music. Her heels touched sacred ground, but it was clear. This was no longer holy space. This was a battlefield, and she wasn't the victim. She was the judge. As she reached the front, she didn't turn to face the priest or the groom. She faced the crowd. Her voice didn't tremble. It didn't rise. It didn't plead. It simply cut through the silence, clean as a blade. "What I saw," she said, "was not an accident, not confusion, not a test of faith." She raised her hand, and in it, her phone. It was real. It was filmed. It was in the bathroom of this very church, moments before this ceremony was meant to begin. No one moved. No one breathed. She tapped the screen. The speakers, hidden among the pillars, came alive. First, a shuffle. Then voices, soft, urgent, intimate. A single line, whispered by a voice unmistakably belonging to Father Abraham. "They don't understand what we share, but soon they will." The groom took one step forward. She raised her hand again, stopping him mid-motion. Her eyes were glassy, but not from tears, from clarity. "I was going to marry a man today, in front of someone I called a spiritual father, but instead, I buried two things, my innocence and your secrets." Guests started murmuring. One woman fainted. The photographer lowered his camera. The bridesmaids turned pale. Daniel said nothing. The priest took a step back, but Elena didn't flinch. She turned toward the altar, looked straight at the crucifix, and bowed her head, not in worship, but in farewell. Then she turned around and walked out the same way she came in, red trailing behind her, like a warning, like a wound that never asked to be healed. She didn't cry in the car. She didn't scream. She didn't text anyone back. But as the door shut behind her, and the church fell into chaos, every single person inside knew they hadn't attended a wedding. They'd witnessed a reckoning. The church was never the same after that. Not the walls, not the air, not the people, and certainly not the silence that followed. After Elena walked out, the ceremony didn't resume. There was no priest to lead it, no bride to bless it. And the groom, he remained frozen near the altar, surrounded by guests who had once praised him, now unwilling to make eye contact. Some left in a hurry. One woman covered her daughter's eyes as she dragged her down the aisle. A man in the back row whispered, "I told you something was off." But most just stood there, as if the church had swallowed time. Father Abraham didn't speak. He stepped away from the pulpit and disappeared through a side door, the same one Elena had used just minutes earlier. Daniel sat down, head in his hands. Tears never came, only sweat, only shaking, only the faint tremble of a man who had been caught in a place he once called sacred. Outside the church, reporters were already waiting. Someone had leaked it. Perhaps a bridesmaid, perhaps a guest, perhaps God himself, tired of being used as a costume for the grotesque. By evening, clips from the confrontation had surfaced on local WhatsApp groups. By morning, they had crossed borders. The video wasn't gory, wasn't violent, but it was uncomfortable. Because it wasn't fiction. It was the truth, caught on camera. The kind of truth people pretend doesn't happen in places painted with stained glass, and no matter what angle people took, defense, denial, disgust, no one could unsee it. The church issued a brief statement. Father Abraham will be placed on administrative leave pending investigation. No apology, no clarity, just a procedure. Daniel resigned from his company 2 days later. His LinkedIn disappeared. His phone went dark. By the end of the week, he had vanished. No forwarding address, no wedding refund claimed. Just gone. And Elena? She didn't make a post, didn't grant interviews, didn't respond to the messages flooding her inbox. But 1 week later, she mailed a box to the church office. Inside it, the red dress, folded, untouched, and a note, 5 words, written in clean, careful handwriting. I found God outside here. No signature, no return address. Just the truth, packed and sent back to where it had been hidden for too long. Rumors began to grow. People said Father Abraham had been quietly transferred twice before, that similar whispers had followed him, that the church had silenced others. But no one had proof. Only shadows, only survivors too afraid to speak, until Elena turned her silence into scripture. For weeks, the congregation shrank. Parents pulled their children from the youth group. Elders whispered more than they prayed, and every time someone stood at that pulpit, they stood in the shadow of what had been exposed. Some said it ended that day, that the scandal had burned itself out, that Elena's walkout was the climax. But for the people of that parish, the story didn't end in that church. It began there. 3 days after the wedding, a cleaning woman, Maria, refused to step into the confessional room. She said it smelled of salt and ash, that the wood inside had splinters, like teeth. She said she saw markings on the walls, thin, shallow, almost invisible, unless the sun hit them at a certain angle. No one believed her, until the deacon checked it himself and came out pale, mumbling Latin under his breath. Another altar boy quit abruptly, refused to say why. Only told his mother he heard Father talking to someone behind the walls. But no one was there. The wedding planner, who stayed late to pack up her props, said she saw a man in red, not Elena, walking barefoot through the pews at midnight. But when she turned on the lights, no one was there. She left everything behind and never came back. Small things started to change. The candles in the sanctuary never stayed lit. Flowers brought to the altar wilted faster than usual, and the organ would hum on its own, even when unplugged. Some said it was grief, others guilt. But one parishioner, an old man named Benedict, said something different. He told the church secretary, it wasn't just the act that defiled the church, it was the silence. That's what invited it in. That's what feeds it. The secretary laughed, brushed him off, until Benedict stopped showing up. His house was found empty, doors open, dinner is still warm. The rosary on his bed, coiled, like it had been placed there by someone who didn't pray. His body was never found, and no one mentioned him again. Elena's name became legend, not just among the youth who whispered her story in hushed tones like folklore, but even among the elders who began to question things they'd accepted for decades. One mother pulled her daughter out of confirmation class. Another refused to take communion from anyone but a lay minister. The diocese tried to repair the image, sent a new priest, younger, eager, smiling too much, but he didn't last long. Said the rectory was too loud at night, said he heard footsteps when no one else was there. He left a letter, 2 sentences only. God is not absent, but something else has taken his seat. No priest lasted more than a season after that. Mass attendance dropped by half. By winter, the church was only open on Sundays. By spring, the doors were sealed completely, just a notice on the gate. Under renovation, temporarily closed. But there were no workers, no scaffolding, no blueprints, just silence. Again. Months passed, rain came, dust settled. The red dress was forgotten, at least publicly. But inside that church office, where it was folded and left, something lingered. They hadn't thrown it out. Couldn't. Even when cleaners were hired, they avoided the box. One woman claimed it felt warm when she touched it. Another swore the scent of rosewood clung to her hands for hours. And then, on a Sunday no one expected, Elena came back. Not with cameras, not with drama. No red carpet of gossip behind her. Just her, standing at the locked gates, hands folded, eyes steady, wearing white. Not wedding white, but peace white. The man who saw her first was an old security guard. He had been on duty during the original wedding. Said nothing that day, not even now. He opened the gate slowly. Elena stepped through. Not a word, not a sound. She entered the empty church. Sunlight filtered through cracked, stained glass, casting strange colors on her dress. She walked down the aisle alone, again. But this time, no trembling, no veil, no betrayal hiding behind smiles. At the altar, she knelt, prayed. 10 minutes, 20, maybe more. No one dared interrupt. Then she stood, opened her bag, and pulled out the red dress, still folded, still clean. She laid it across the altar, not like a sacrifice, not like an offering, but like a burial, a goodbye, a cleansing. She whispered something, too soft to hear. And then she walked out, never looked back, never came back. And the very next morning, the church caught fire. No storm, no lightning, no vandalism, just fire. Started near the altar, spread slowly, but precisely. Everything burned, except the red dress. Firefighters found it untouched, draped across the scorched stone like it had been waiting to outlive everything false, everything hidden. The diocese called it a tragedy. I called it an accident. But those who had been there knew, somehow they knew. It was a release, a cleansing, a purging of the lie, of the silence, of the twisted sanctity that had been used to cover shame. And in the weeks that followed, a new church rose, not just in bricks, but in people, small home groups, private prayer circles, women who had once been silent, now telling their own stories. Some mentioned him, Father Abraham. Some didn't have to. Their eyes said enough. And at the center of every circle, every gathering, was the story of the girl in the red dress, the one who came back, not for revenge, not for applause, but for peace. And somewhere in that, God finally spoke again. And if you're still watching this, ask yourself, if this had been your wedding, your groom, your priest, would you have stayed silent, or would you have worn your red dress too? Before you scroll, ask yourself, are you the kind of person who waits for others to speak up, or are you brave enough to speak even when your voice shakes? If you felt anything while watching this, if your gut twisted, if your breath paused for even a second, don't just watch, subscribe. Because stories like these don't get told unless you keep them alive. And if you won't subscribe, enter the comments and explain why. We'll wait, but the truth won't. But the she